He is State Representative Jim Struzzi joining us in the studio, brought to you by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. Good morning.
Good morning, Todd.
Good to have you with us this morning as we talk about things happening in Harrisburg recently and some legislation that is making its way. Sometimes we hear about the legislation, we think it's not moving quickly enough, but there's a process, isn't there? And you have some bills that are in the pipeline.
Well, there certainly is, and we have a pretty aggressive agenda. We'll be back in session next week, starting budget discussions, but there are a lot of key bills in play right now, a lot of committee movement. I have several bills that I think are very important to our local communities, to our healthcare industry, to drug addiction and treatment, obviously to job creation, job growth, and workforce development.
Yeah. In Harrisburg right now, lawmakers, after a year of pandemic mania, you are tasked with the job of rebuilding this economy. It shut down last year, and there's damage that some folks say is just irreversible, but you are supposed to reverse the irreversible in Harrisburg, and you're working on that.
Well, we absolutely are, and you're right. There's jobs that have been permanently lost, businesses that have been permanently closed, and that is very unfortunate and unacceptable in many cases. So that's why we're trying to do everything we can to utilize the federal money that's coming in, the American Rescue Plan, as we did with the CARES money last year, to make sure that we are providing for those businesses that are still getting back on their feet, to make sure that they have the resources that they need to recover, to make sure that we're getting people back to work. We're still struggling with businesses that can't find enough employees across the board, really. So we have to do everything we can to provide for those businesses. I have a bill that's in the works, actually several bills, that will help the entertainment industry, one to help the intermediate units. I also have another bill that we're working on to help with workforce transitions, to provide some additional training to people who may have lost their jobs during the pandemic and now need to go back and get some additional training to perhaps enter into a new career field. So those are all in the works right now. But the big picture is, we're getting billions in federal money right now, and we have to make sure that we are very smart with how we utilize that money, because it is going to be a one-time plug into Pennsylvania, a one-time plug into our local communities, and chances are we're not going to see this kind of money again. Mm-hmm. So we want to make sure that we are very wise with how we utilize this money to make sure that we're spreading it out as much as we can to help as many people as possible.
In the end, people will always have their criticisms of how the money was spent and what initiatives were put forward, but there are some hot-button topics. But before we get to some of those, you mentioned it, the budget. You got to deal with that this month. This is budget month in Harrisburg, and you really have to pound it out here, don't you, in the next 30 days?
Yes, we certainly do, and we kind of delayed some of the budget talks until we fully understood how we could utilize some of that American Rescue Plan money, but those guidelines have come out now. We had a meeting earlier this week, and we'll be digging into it next week when we return and throughout the entire month of June. But again, I want to caution everyone, because this is a one-time plug of money, and the expectations may be that we can fulfill every need that's out there. And believe me, there are plenty of asks right now from a lot of different organizations, different groups that want to see an increase in the budget. And we'd love to do all those types of things, but again, it's a one-time fix. What do you do next year when the budget rolls around? Do you roll those funds back? Or do you increase taxes? And no one wants to see anyone increase taxes from our perspective at any rate. So we're trying to be very careful with how we utilize this federal money to make sure that we don't build false expectations for the future. Yeah, because next year when the money isn't there from this one-time infusion, then people will say, oh, you're cutting our budget. Well, exactly.
And that's not the case at all. It's just you had this one-time thing, and you were able to do some things with it. So you basically have to take all that money and say, that's not part of our budget. This is part of our budget. This is our budget, the basic foundation of Pennsylvania's spending plan. What are some of your expectations for that? Well,
I think the good news is, Todd, that we are seeing a dramatic increase in state revenues right now. But again, that's coming from people getting their stimulus money, their increased unemployment. People are anxious to get out and spend. So now that some of the or all of the COVID restrictions have been rolled back, with the exception of the masks, people are out spending. So we've seen our revenues increase well over expectations this spring. That's great news for the budget. But again, we have fundamental needs that we have to fill, and we are going to be able to utilize some of that federal money, particularly in the area of human services, because people are struggling right now. Mm-hmm. And human services, traditionally comes in with almost $1 billion in supplemental spending. That's money above what they were budgeted for. So we're looking at, can we get ahead of that this time around and budget for that money rather than having to backfill it? Because that has to come from somewhere, and it comes from taxpayer dollars. So we want to make sure that we are providing those basic fundamental human services need for those organizations, like aging, children and youth, drug addiction and alcohol prevention, all those different organizations that are really vital to helping people right now as we come out of this pandemic, because we're seeing the mental health issues, we're seeing the drug addiction issues, we're seeing the family struggles, increase tenfold in many cases. So we want to make sure that above all, we fund those basic human services needs. But as I said, we want to be careful that we aren't just granting every increased request that we get. And I get tons of them, believe me, being on appropriations. And we don't want to build false expectations for the future.
All right. Some hot button things in Harrisburg right now. You're either involved directly or you're a very, very interested observer who one day will have to vote on some of these things.
Yes.
State system of higher education. The redesign is in place. The legislature has been holding some hearings and getting some explanations. How do you see that whole argument that is going on over the future of the state system? How do you see it ending?
Well, obviously, my primary concern is the health and future of IUP. And the climate right now is very difficult. It's a challenge when there is so much uncertainty in the system redesign. How is that going to impact IUP? How is it going to impact the overall state system? And as I have said from the beginning of this, since I took office, you realize that you cannot continue to dump millions and millions of dollars into a system that is not healthy. IUP and some of the other state system schools that are healthy have been basically supplementing these schools that have been failing financially. That can't continue to occur. There's no way that IUP and the state system can reduce tuitions. There's no way that we can continue to give state money or increase state money to decrease tuition rates without first balancing this fiscal issue. So that's I think the positive that will come from this. I think you'll see other positives, hopefully more opportunity for IUP, perhaps with students seeing the system redesign changes in those 6 other schools, that people might want to come to a university like IUP that has more stability. But I think it's going to be a long transition. I'm hoping that we get through it sooner rather than later, and I've expressed that to the chancellor because there is so much uncertainty, from students, from faculty. We need to get to a point where we know what the future looks like and how we get there. But the bottom line is we have to fund higher education. We have created an unhealthy system, an unhealthy climate for student recruitment by funding the state-related schools like Pitt, Penn State, Temple, Lincoln, and underfunding the state system. To me, that doesn't make any sense because we're giving money to Pitt and Penn State. They're able to reduce their tuition rates to be competitive with the state system, and that is not how it was intended to be. So we need to do the system redesign to fix the system so that we can put more state funding into higher ed to level off and create those tuition rates that are more competitive.
Last week you were in the county courthouse with many others talking about broadband in Indiana County. Great efforts being made to make it happen so that everybody in the county can basically turn their computer on and be on even footing with everybody else when it comes to broadband access. As difficult as that is, we've got good people in place that are trying to solve that problem. What is going to be what I'm getting at is there seem to be a whole bunch of people who are involved with all kinds of different solutions, whittling that down to come up with a solid plan. That's the process that we're in the middle of right now, correct?
Well, absolutely. That was good news last week, great news moving in the right direction, but we still have a lot of areas that we have to address. And it's really going to take a public-private partnership. Some of these larger entities, Comcast, Verizon, Salzgiver that we partnered with on this current broadband initiative, need to come to the table as well and help us build the infrastructure needed to address all of these problem areas. Just yesterday, we were out in Commodore at a farm for the legislative update from the PA Farm Bureau. And the farm out there, it's Raw and Learn on Blossom Hollow Road, he still can't get good internet access. He still can't get cell phone coverage. And you know how it is in the dairy industry today. It's all technology. Yeah. And if we can't provide that basic technology, we can't grow our businesses. We can't help our farmers. We can't reduce their cost. So the initiative was great. I'm glad we did that last week because people weren't aware that we were able to make so many strides using that influx of federal money. But we still have a ways to go. And I also think it's going to take a combination of new technology as well. We don't need to hardwire everything now. We're seeing advancements in satellites. We're seeing advancements in a different kind of technology that create hotspots and things like that. So I think it's going to be a combination of all those factors. But the bottom line for me is we have a map of Indiana County. We know where the problem areas are, and we need to address those.
Yeah. Okay. So internet broadband is going to be a big issue. It's been a big issue since the pandemic began, really, because that really kicked it into another level. Couple of minutes left with State Representative Jim Struzzi. What do folks need to know about what's coming in the next several weeks in Harrisburg and with your office?
Well, there's a lot of big things happening, obviously, with the budget. We're going to be pushing a pretty aggressive agenda of bills here moving into July. As I said, I'm working on a lot of key things right now. We're working on legislation to help with historically underutilized business districts, which is the entire county. All of Indiana County is a hub zone. So I know I mentioned this previously, but we're starting now to whittle that legislation down to the point where I can introduce it. But it will basically require a certain level of state procurement to come from hub zones. That should help our businesses here in Indiana County and really across this Commonwealth if they're in a hub zone. And they are spread across this country. Or the state, I'm sorry. And then, of course, we still have the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative that we simply cannot allow to continue to move forward. More and more groups are coming forward, expressing their concerns. We had a big rally in Pittsburgh a couple of weeks ago with just about every trade union there speaking out against RGGI. My bill will be in committee this week, House Bill 637. Senator Pittman's bill, Senate Bill 119, I believe, is going to be moving through the Senate next week. But again, if RGGI is so good for Pennsylvania as the governor continues to claim, why can't we vet it through the state legislature? And that's all our bills are asking. But we have some serious concerns on the impacts that will happen here in Indiana County and across this Commonwealth. Everyone's electric rates are going to increase. Manufacturing jobs are going to be lost. Across the board. And we've had this discussion several times, but that continues to be the forefront of our concerns because it will have just a dire detrimental impact on Indiana County.
We have been watching, away from RGGI, but still in the fuel industry, we've been watching gas prices absolutely soar.
Right. That
increases the cost of all consumer goods. Inflation is really becoming a problem, isn't it?
It certainly is, and I think that hopefully our U.S. government is seeing what's happening with these cyber attacks. You watch the news now; they're attacking the food industry, transportation, the pipeline. I mean, those are key infrastructure points, and we have to be out in front of that because it could get worse. And I think that's something that I hope the U.S. government is working to address. But it really gets to all of us. We are all subject to a possible cyber attack. Your identity, your business could be held hostage by a cyber attack. So technology, while it's great, just getting back to even the dairy farms, if you shut down the technology, do we go back to milking cows the old way?
Yeah.
And sometimes you do have to have perhaps a redundant system that allows for those types of failures and make sure that it isn't so detrimental to the entire economy.
The ripple effect can create a wave, not just a ripple.
Yes.
He's State Representative Jim Struzzi with us here this morning. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Todd.
It's the voice of Indiana County, WCCS 101.